So thank you all for joining us. The aim of today is to go through some innovation related incentives for the manufacturing industry specifically. So we've been working in the government grant space for close to 12 years now. We help companies both large and small. We've helped them secure millions of dollars worth of tax offsets and cash refunds. This is an incentive which is available to both companies large and small, and we assist companies both large and small into getting the R&D tax incentive. So what is it? It's a federal government initiative. It's actually been around since the mid-1980s. Not many people know this. And the underlying aim is to foster Australian innovation. It's very much in line with all the other OECD countries who have R&D tax incentive regimes in place. Around the world, the R&D tax incentive regimes are based off what's called the Frascati Manual, and this was written, nearly 50 years ago now. But our R&D tax incentive was pretty much based on that and has since been refined to what is known as the R&D tax incentive today. It's not very well advertised in the fact that 70% of eligible businesses do not claim the R&D tax incentive. So year on year, the data that we get from AusIndustry is that there's only roughly between 13 to 15,000 R&D claimants a year, which is a surprisingly very low number considering how much Australians invest in innovation and how many small to medium enterprises there actually are in Australia that are conducting R&D. So a lot of the time when we speak to businesses, the first thing they say is, well, how come I never heard of this? Well, it's a bit unfortunate because it has been around for so long. It's just very underutilized. So how does the R&D tax incentive work? So if we put the R&DTI at the top, the first row there is AusIndustry and the ATO. So these are the two government bodies that actually regulate the R&D tax incentive. So if we were to break it down into its simplest form, AusIndustry, they care more about the technical aspect of a company's R&D claim, and the ATO cares more about the costing side of things. So what we do is with AusIndustry, we have within 10 months after financial year end to lodge what's called an application form. So for companies with a 30 June year end, you have until 30 April the following year to lodge an application form with AusIndustry. In this application form, you detail, these are my R&D activities. This is what I've accomplished during the year. And basically, this is how what it is that I'm doing constitutes eligible R&D within the realms of the R&D tax law. AusIndustry receive this application form and they provide what's called a registration number. And this registration number is quite important because on the other side of the equation, you've got the Australian Taxation Office. So when you lodge the company tax return, you include what's called an R&D schedule. And within this R&D schedule, you disclose all the costs associated with the activities that you conducted in the prior year. So salary costs, direct costs, contractor costs, even portion of overheads. You include all that in the R&D schedule and it forms essentially an appendix in the company tax return. The important thing is at the top of the R&D schedule, you include the registration number. And then this registration number informs the ATO that, right, the numbers included in the tax return, the R&D schedule relates to activities that have been lodged with the AusIndustry in the application form. And that's how the two parties, AusIndustry and the ATO, communicate with one another and vet that you've conducted the process correctly of lodging your application with AusIndustry and then in turn claiming the costs related to it. The incentive details. So what is it that we actually get? Why are we going through this process? So for the financial year ended 30 June 2021, there's two tiers and it's broken down into whether your aggregated turnover is less than or greater than $20 million. So aggregated turnover in this instance means the turnover of the company that's claiming, as well as any subsidiaries or any companies that it controls. So for companies with less than $20 million worth of aggregated turnover, you get a 43.5% refundable tax offset. For companies with greater than $20 million worth of turnover, you get a 38.5% tax offset. So a key thing to note here is that if you're less than 20 million, you can potentially lock in that refundable component. So a very fancy way of saying, just say, for example, you spend 100K on eligible R&D activities, you get a 43.5K tax offset. So you've got to use that 43.5K to pay any tax owing to the ATO. If you have no tax owing, that 43.5K actually gets refunded to your company's bank account. If you got greater than $20 million worth of turnover and you spend 100K on R&D, you get 38.5K, which you've got to use to pay any tax owing to the ATO. If you got no tax owing, that 38.5K actually gets carried forward to future financial years. From 1 July 2021 onward, the regime has actually changed slightly. So there's no changes to for companies less than $20 million worth of turnover. However, what they've done is they've put in an R&D intensity test of 2%. So basically, if your R&D expenditure is at least 2% of total expenses, then your R&D offset rate actually lifts considerably. So your R&D offset rate, if it's greater than 2% R&D intensity, it's your corporate tax rate plus 16.5%. So if you've got a company tax rate of 30%, then your R&D offset rate actually becomes 46.5%. If your R&D intensity is less than 2%, then your R&D offset rate becomes your corporate tax rate, which let's say is 30%, plus 8.5%. So back to 38.5%. So really, this is aimed to reward larger companies who are conducting more R&D. So really, the Australian government here is really helping foster innovation into both large and small companies. Basically, in the manufacturing industry, there's two main, avenues of R&D claims. There's the design and development of new products, as well as the design and development of new processes. Sometimes these two avenues even overlap. So just say, for example, you've designed and developed a new product that you need to conduct R&D on in order to be able to sell to the market. And as a result of this new product, you need to design and develop a new process as well. Then you can claim the R&D tax incentive for both the new product and the new process. An important thing to keep in mind here is that when you talk about product and processes, there's also this concept of feedstock and dumped feedstock in R&D world when it comes to the manufacturing industry. So if you're conducting R&D and you need to do a trial run to either fine-tune a new product or fine-tune a new process, the raw materials plus the energy that goes into the first set of trial runs, what we call the R&D phase, you can claim as part of the R&D tax incentive. So all the feedstock that gets dumped, you can claim the cost for that as well. You just need to keep record regarding the trial runs, how much, for example, cost per kilogram was used, and you can flush out that details and include it as part of the R&D claim as well. Where the R&D kind of stops at that point is when the process has essentially been finalized and you know it works, and then from that point onwards, it's no longer R&D, it's considered commercial, and that's when the R&D phase of it stops, and as a result, the costs you claim can't be included from that commercial point onward. But the two main avenues we're talking about when it comes to R&D for the manufacturing space, if you're designing and developing a new or improved product, or if you're designing and developing a new or improved process. What does it mean from a new process perspective? This is a question I get asked a lot. So basically, when it comes to a new process, it's got to be some sort of manufacturing technology or methodology which either doesn't exist or you've done the research into the market and there's no, for example, there's no line for this available which you can just purchase off the shelf, plug and play. It requires you guys to come up with a bespoke process to trial it, test it, make sure it works, etc. The new product one, it's a little bit more self-explanatory. You're literally designing and developing new products which you plan to sell to the market at a later date once you get that new product off the ground. an important thing to note when it comes to products or processes, a failed product or a failed process still constitutes R&D. So this is a question I get a lot, is that I've tried to develop this new product, but I couldn't get it to market. Can I still claim R&D? The answer to that is yes. Although failure is not good from a commercial perspective, it's normally a good indicator of an R&D activity because it shows that there's that technical uncertainty and you're going above and beyond what's currently known. You're pushing the envelope when it comes to innovation. So you can still claim the R&D tax incentive for failed products or processes if it doesn't work. That kind of wraps up the R&D tax incentive side and kind of goes through the main things I wanted to talk about from the R&D tax incentive. A lot of the information available regarding the sectors, what's going to be available, etc., we publish in our newsletter, and we also publish frequently on our LinkedIn. And we have quite a robust discussion on our LinkedIn page regarding, what's going to be coming up, what to look out for, and how to best position your business to maximize any government grant help that's available to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining. The pleasure is all mine, and looking forward to continuing this discussion with you guys and helping make sure that manufacturing in Australia not just survives, but also thrives in the coming years.